Good afternoon, everyone. We've got a great afternoon for you. Virunga. The name sounds like something out of a Joseph Conrad novel, doesn't it? Mystery, exotic. First and oldest national park in Africa, 1925. A park of incredible biodiversity, the most in Africa. One of the most biodiversity parks in the world. Also a landscape unparalleled. The snow-covered Ruwenzori's, grasslands, lakes, volcanoes, and of course wildlife that's absolutely extraordinary. So in 1959, a 26-year-old gentleman decided to go to the Virunga. His name was George Schaller. He was working on his PhD at the University of Wisconsin. He just graduated from the University of Alaska. And he wanted to study an animal that had often been described as a brute, that had been described as something of a caricature of King Kong, the mountain gorilla. And of course, George did what he does so well, and he dispelled the myths. And in fact, in George's book, Year of the Gorilla, he writes this about mountain gorillas. No one who looks into the eyes of a gorilla, intelligent, gentle, vulnerable, can remain unchanged. For the gap between ape and human vanishes. We know that the gorilla still lives within us. Do gorillas also recognize this ancient connection? George has written 16 books. He was mentioned in Peter Matheson's book, Snow Leopard, as the finest field biologist in the world. I've spent the past 30 years with field biologists, and I've never met one who would argue with that. Not only that, he's a terrific writer. When Peter Matheson was writing Snow Leopard, which won a National Book Award in 1979, George wrote Stones of Silence, and some, myself included, feel it's an even better book about snow leopards. So let's fast forward to our next panelist, Emmanuel de Merode. Emmanuel first came to Virunga in 1993, working in the park system in what eventually became the Democratic Republic of Congo, is what we call it today. In 2008, he became the director and chief warden of Virunga National Park. Emmanuel had many different paths he could take in life, and he took the path of service, he took the path of commitment, dedication to humanity, to wildlife, and to conservation. There are 360 rangers who fall under his supervision at the park, and over the years, 140 of those rangers have lost their lives. One of those rangers who felt that pain is with us today, Innocent. Many of you, I'm sure, heard him this morning. His brother has been killed in the line of duty. And here is a great small world story. When George was in the park in 1959, Innocent's uncle was director of the park. So here we are today. Our moderator tonight, this afternoon, is an old friend I met in 1998. I looked it up, Sanjan. In Otjiwarongo, Namibia, at the Cheetah Conservation Fund. And Sanjan was working on his PhD. He went on to become the chief scientist of the Nature Conservancy. He also is now at CI as executive vice president. I might add, too, that George today works with the Wildlife Conservation Society and works with Panthera and is still, of course, doing great work. So this afternoon, it's my pleasure, it's actually more than that, it's my honor to introduce these three gentlemen and Sanjan to moderate a panel to talk about one of the most spectacular threatened places on Earth, Virunga National Park.
thank you. So when I was asked to do this, I didn't even hesitate. I didn't even look at my calendar. I didn't care where in the world I was going to be. I knew I had to be here because this is history in the making. I mean, this is where it really happens, right? So you've got George here who's started in the park, 60 years ago, and then you have that continuation, that lineage right here represented on the stage. So I absolutely knew I wanted to come here. Chris is right. George, is one of these individuals that in the world of molecular biology and genetics and big data, he still reminds us with his books and his observations that the world is living and it's still out there. And it's pretty amazing. And all you have to do is take a pair of binoculars and a notebook and go look at it. Innocent, I just only got the chance to meet today, but he obviously comes from a long line of rangers. His father was a ranger. His uncle was a ranger. His brother was a ranger. And I suspect that his children will follow in his footsteps as well. Backstage, I was privy to this incredible moment when George took out a slide and gave it to Innocent and said, this slide is of your uncle taken in 1961. That's just quite amazing. And then, of course, Emmanuel, we met last year in the UK, and he was stoic as always, but he would occasionally wince when people would come and slap him on the back or give him a hug, and it only later transpired, and he didn't mention this, that obviously not very long before that, he had been shot multiple times in the line of duty outside the park that he protects. So thank you all for being here. And Emmanuel, if I could start with you, because we know about the folks on this panel, but tell us a little bit about this park. Tell us a little bit about Virunga. And I only know about the mountain gorillas, so tell us what else is in this park.
Well, thank you, Sanjay. There are many ways of describing Virunga. There are endless ways of describing it. The way I'd probably do it is the way I experienced it many years ago. I'd been told about this remarkable park. I was very fortunate to grow up in Kenya. And whilst, as I grew up, I heard about this incredible place in the center of Africa. And so when I was young, I bought a motorbike in Kampala and drove across Uganda into Congo. And the place I was looking for was a place that was described by an ecologist as the most beautiful place on earth, and that was a place called Ishango. I'm not sure if that ecologist actually said it, but it was something I'd read somewhere. That ecologist was George Schaller. And really that's what drew me to this place, which was Ishango. But when I crossed the border into Congo, I got my first
and we have a map here, by the way, just so you...
When I crossed in the north, I spent the first few years of my life in Congo in the north of the park. And what you see there are, of course, these spectacular mountains. These are the mythical mountains of the moon, identified by Ptolemy in the over 2,000 years ago as the mythical source of the Nile. And these are some of the highest mountains in Africa. They have glaciers on top. As you go down these mountains, you get into the moorlands and the alpine forests, these amazing Hagenia forests, and then down into the tropical moist forests and the southern reaches of the Ituri forests, these great rainforests of the Congo Basin, where you have these amazing species like the okapi and then a whole array of primates. And then you move into the savannas, which once had the highest biomass of large mammals on Earth, this incredible assemblage of elephants and hippos and buffalo, the greatest population of hippos in the world. There were 27,000 hippos in Virunga National Park, 20% of all the world's hippos. And then down into the volcanoes in the south of the park with its lava fields, and of course the greatest lava lake in the world, the largest lava lake. So you get this vision of the center of the Earth in many ways. And it's those same volcanoes that are the home to what is Virunga's most famous resident, which are the mountain gorillas in the south of the park. And of course, that's where I ended up several years later. Whilst it was these amazing landscapes that brought me to Virunga, really it was the people I met there, and really this incredible team of rangers that kept me in Virunga for so many years. And what they really taught me was that there's so much more to conservation, so much more to this park, and it marries this human dimension as well. It's a park that has been through what perhaps no other park in the world has known, which is this incredibly violent succession of wars. It's been at the epicenter of one of the greatest political upheavals in recent history, which is the Congolese Civil War, succession of wars, every one of which has started either in or immediately around the national park. So when you describe the park, you describe it in terms of its ecology, in terms of its incredible landscapes, but also in terms of the political realities, which is this terrible civil war that has seen the deaths of over 6 million people in eastern Congo over the last 20 years. And those are really the two dimensions to the park that are so important.
Right. So George, you go to the park in 1959.
59.
And you're a graduate student. And your advisor says, you're studying, I think, birds, right? And your advisor says, do you want to go study gorillas? And you're like, sure. Right? That's basically what happens. And he's so shipped off now to the Congo. What was that like, going there? What was the park like? What was research like in those early days?
Well, it was lovely. My wife and I, who's sitting right there, okay, we climbed up into the mountains. This was still Belgian Congo at the time. And there's a lovely cabin, just a wooden shack actually, at 10,000 feet between two of the volcanoes, gorilla forest all around. The first step is to make friends with the gorillas. They have this reputation of being ferocious, hellish creatures and all that sort of thing. Well, don't ever believe that kind of stuff. I started following them, and after we met a number of times, they started being interested. And hey, soon I could sleep with them. I want to see what they're doing at night, so I take my sleeping bag and lie down near where they're building the nest and watch them get up in the morning, stretching. The big male leader walks off. And so I habituated 6 groups that I could watch in great detail. Right. They all had names. Right. And these days, both in Rwanda and Congo, the guides now also know all the gorillas by name. Then a gorilla becomes an individual. And that means you have emotional involvement with it, and you're more concerned about saving it.
So let me ask you this. That's a really interesting question, because when you went there, you went to look at the biology of the animal and the behavior. Was conservation in your mind at that time?
No.
Were threats apparent?
It's a good question. But I very soon learned when Rwanda, which was also under Belgian control, cut a big chunk of the forest out and gave it over to tea plantations. In late 50s, a civil war started in Rwanda, which spilled on over into the Congo. And people with spears ran through the forest, and that made our studies difficult. And then Congo got independence, and it's been chaos basically in the area since then. So in 1960, I took Kay to Uganda. Right after independence on June 30th, Congo blew up. And I worked a little bit more trying to help the park.
Right.
And you saw what conservation can do. You have to be involved in trying to protect it. But the real Well, the gorillas dropped. When I was there were maybe 450 in the Virungas. They dropped to about 250 by the 1980s. But then it's turned around, not only because you had a tremendous guard force, both on the Congo side and the Rwanda side, but a very important thing happened. Two husband-wife team, Amy Vedder and Bill Weber from the Wildlife Conservation Society, came to Rwanda and said, we're going to get tourism going so the local people benefit. And working with community, education, and tourism.
Right.
If you now go to Rwanda or the Congo, you have to go. There's nothing like sitting next to a gorilla. You want to go over and give them a hug, but you don't want to because you don't want to pass on any diseases. But the fact is that now in Rwanda, over 20,000 people a year go and pay $750 to watch them 1 hour. It's very strictly regulated. Rwanda's done a tremendous job of protecting them. And the Congo now is getting more and more tourists again as it becomes a little quieter.
Right.
So
let me just ask, by the way, so all of this is being live cast right now, and so those of you who are following this online, and if you want to send us some questions, you can do that using the hashtag Let's Explore. Hashtag Let's Explore if you want to send us some questions for the panel. So the two of you found your way to this Eden in the middle of Africa. But you, innocent, you're from there. You were born there. Your family is local there. How did you get involved in conservation, given all the things that are going around in the place where you were born?
Yes, you know that I've born in conservation. My uncle, my father, and my brother was a ranger too. So I have been inspired by my family.
Was it from a young age? I mean, as a child, did you go out with your father or your brother? I mean, do you remember that?
When I was 11, we was seeing our father early in the morning, putting his boots, wearing his uniform, taking his rifle. Then we was asking each other in the family, what kind of job our father do every day? Taking his rifle, wearing his boots, which kind of job? Then we tried to ask our father, every day you are working early, you go inside the forest, what are you going to do there? Then he tried to describe us that the work which he's doing is interesting for all of us in the family. We tried to ask why. He said, there is some mammals inside there, but they seems to be like you. We said, no. How an animal can just have can be like us human being.
Right.
Then we said, okay, we would like just to go one day with you.
Okay.
And he said, okay, it's the gorilla, they're around here in these days. So are you able just to follow me? We said, yes.
How old were you when you saw that first gorilla?
I was 11. Then at my first time, we went with our father, and when he shows us the gorilla, I saw something which was like a diamond. I can say it was a big thing. Then I said, wow, what is this?
Right.
But on my mind, I saw that it's similar to an old man. Then black. On his face, you can see some small eyes, but a big nose. Then I saw, wow, is it a man who went in the forest then didn't remember that he could come back? Yeah.
It does happen now and then.
Yeah, that makes me happy just to see how someone can go in the bush, then stay there. Yeah,
When you're here in the US,
yeah.
when you're in these hallowed halls, are you homesick? Do you want to go back?
Yes, I'm feeling sick because, yeah. I want to stay with animals. Yeah.
So you really miss it. You want to go back despite the hardships.
Yes, I miss them.
Right.
Yeah.
So look, we had a pretty rough time around 2007, I think, when there was this quite famous silverback and I think 4 females that were killed and documented then by National Geographic and others. And there's a famous photograph, if you've seen it, sort of this crucifix photograph of this very large silverback kind of lying in this sort of... Tell us about that. And you were there, I believe, right?
Yeah, Innocent and I were both
But you were
there.
not the ranger. You were not the head of the park at that point.
I wasn't, no. I wasn't, in fact, working for the government at the time. That came afterwards. But Innocent was there with me, and he was head of the guerrilla monitoring unit in the park. And we were just camping in the forest, and we heard gunshots. That's not an unfamiliar sound, unfortunately, in that region, except it was coming from deep inside the forest. So Innocent organized a patrol immediately. And there happened to be Brent Sturton, who was a photographer with National Geographic, who'd happened to be with us then. And that's how those terrible moments were immortalized in a way. And we went into the forest, we walked for several hours, and then we came across this terrible, terrible scene, which was the massacre of the Rugendo family of gorillas. And it was incredibly, it was an awful scene. I mean, as you know, Innocent described it earlier, it was a catastrophe for us because it was a signal that we were actually losing that battle of keeping these mountain gorillas going. It was a year, 2007, in which we lost 9 gorillas in quick succession, and we were losing control of the situation. And the scene that we saw in July that year was of 5 gorillas that were killed, and we couldn't work out why. We couldn't work out what was happening. Because the baby gorillas were left on their mothers' bodies to die. They were not collected as trophies, in a sense.
So this wasn't a poaching. This wasn't a regular act of poaching.
That's right. And the gorillas weren't cut up for meat, which would have been another reason. They were just killed and left there. And it took us about a year to really work it out. And that's when we realized that we were caught up in Virunga in a much, much bigger problem than just the mountain gorillas. You know, our work, our lives are the mountain gorillas, but actually everything is connected.
And what's that bigger problem?
And what we discovered, and it took us about a year really to work it out, was that they weren't killing the gorillas because of the gorillas. They were killing the gorillas because of the forests. And what you have to understand in Eastern Congo is that there has been this succession of wars, and you have to really look at what is the underlying cause of those wars, and it's the illegal extraction of natural resources that's fueling the war by funding the armed militias. It's illegal to cut down the forest for charcoal, but it's an incredibly valuable resource. It's worth about $35 million a year. And so these militias were controlling the trade in charcoal. And so they wanted free access to the forest, but that forest is also the home of the mountain gorillas. So that put them in confrontation with the rangers. And the easiest way to prevent the rangers from protecting the forest was to kill the gorillas. By killing the gorillas, which were an easy target, that would discourage the rangers from protecting their habitat.
Right.
And that way.
Right.
And so that's why there was this spree of sort of, what seemed like an act of horrific vandalism. Actually, it was a way of discouraging the work of Innocent and the team.
Subsequent to that, you then became the head warden of the park.
So what we discovered, as like I was saying earlier, everything's interconnected.
Yeah.
And so you've got the militias, but the militias, to be able to do their job, they have to get the charcoal to the market. So the militias control the forests, but they don't control the roads. The roads are controlled by others. And so they have to interact with the government forces. And amongst those were our own staff. We came to the very brutal realization that there were members within our own team who were working with the militias to make money by clearing the forest. And so what that really brought about was it created a division. There were rangers like Innocent who stood by their responsibilities, their duty to protect the forest, but there were others who decided to
make some money.
To make money, to betray their park. And the government took this very seriously, and they decided to have a complete change in the management of the park. And so they created a new team, and I became a part of that team.
Right. Innocent, when this happened, and when you were a ranger in the park, did you know did you quickly realize the significance of this? Did you realize that there were people within the park who were betraying the park, as Emmanuel put it?
At that time, we didn't know if we'll have someone to support us, but it wasn't easy just to work on that way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what your day is like in the park. You were saying to me, you don't live, first of all, with your family for most of the time, right? When you're in the park, you're living away from the family. And why is that?
It's according to these several wars we had in our country. Then we saw that staying with our families, we are losing them on fighting. So we chose that to stay ourselves so that we can just work hardly just to secure the area.
And you go on foot patrols, you were telling me.
Yes.
What's that like?
We don't use cars. We use our feet. Yeah.
This is referring to a question I said. So you go with a vehicle? He's like, no, we go by foot. I'm like, okay, sorry. All right, so what's a foot patrol like? How many guys go? What do you guys do?
It's like a section, 8 guys with a commander. As you can see there, I'm with a team.
Yeah, that's you right there, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I'm taking to the Prancard. So that's a team of patrol. Whenever we want to go, we put our boots, plastic boots, put the uniform, then take our rifle. Then we have to give rangers some instruction how they will be behave, how they will be taken when maybe we'll meet with some poachers. So we have to defend ourselves. It's a risk, we know.
And it's a real risk. I mean, rangers die every year in the park or around the park defending the park. Is that correct?
It's correct, but it's their choice. We choose this job just to defend the nature.
That seems extraordinary. I mean, I understand that. I understand people putting themselves in harm's way. But the risk here is immediate, is real. When you go out in the morning, you know that if you encounter poachers or other forces, you could come under fire. It's a real risk. And you've lost people on the front line.
Yes, but we can't accept that people come inside the forest, kill animals, destroy the cutting trees, and without, as I say, without nature, there is no life. So we have to defend the wildlife.
Without nature, there's no life. What do you mean by that?
We have this problem of climate change. It's according to this destruction of the cutting trees, then the weather is changing every time. It's according to this. So we have just to protect so that we can have a good life.
So protect the forest and you ultimately protect people as well.
Yes.
I should just mention here that both Innocent and Emmanuel are being honored as Explorers of the Year on behalf of the rangers of Virunga National Park. And this incredible honor is being given by Rolex as a sponsor by National Geographic and sponsored by Rolex. Now, usually they would get a watch, but there's only one watch and there's two of them. And so they've both generously agreed to auctioning off the watch in a raffle, which you can buy a ticket for outside. You get like 20 bucks can get you a Rolex. I think 100 bucks gets you 6 tickets, so there's a discount there. But what's amazing about it is that that money that's being raised will go to provide for the widows and orphans of the rangers that have lost their lives in the park, in the defense of that park. That would be a Rolex that you could wear with a lot of pride. I just want to mention to both of them. Okay. Please do that. George, one of the things you've done so well is write these amazing books and articles and scientific papers. But your books have really resonated. The book on Panda, The Way of the Panda, and obviously the gorilla book. What role do you think media can play? And we're here in National Geographic. What role do you think media can play in illuminating these problems?
It can play a much, much larger role. The media plays far too small a role. Pick up any newspaper. You have 10 pages of business news. You have 10 pages of sports, and if you look hard, you might find one small paragraph on environment. And it seems like people forget that everything we want, have, need comes from nature. So unless the media really get behind nature, discussing the conservation problems in television, television is equally bad.
Nat Geo TV is great, but in general.
Conservation. It's not enough to show animals. You've got to see what is their problem and how can you contribute to solving that problem. And everybody can contribute. And so, yes, the media need much more. And I feel it's basically a scientist's responsibility, not to write scientific reports only, which very few people read, but get out to the public and promote what you're doing. Because, hey, something like gorillas or tigers or pandas, people actually want to know. They get emotionally involved. And if you're emotionally involved, you want to help protect it. It's like your whole family is emotionally involved in saving those gorillas, and you will be successful.
Thank you.
So the Netflix movie, I have to ask you, the movie, Virunga, does that hurt or help your cause in the terms of tourists who are coming or trying to come to your park? You have some tourists that are coming now.
Yeah.
3, 4, maybe 500 in the high season, which
Yeah.
seems amazing that they're traveling there for this experience.
Yeah.
Does it hurt this?
Well, it's as George and yourself were saying, it all relates to the importance of media. We learned early on, partly because of the National Geographic work in 2007, 2008, just how critical the issue of global awareness is for our small patch of forest in the middle of Africa. The reason we worked on that film was not to do with tourism. It was to do with the fact that we were confronted with this enormous problem,
Right.
Which was the issue of oil. We've talked about the different aspects of Virunga, and one aspect is that there's all this amazing wildlife on top, but under the surface there's this belief that there may be oil. And of course, Congo has some of the strictest environmental laws in the world. It's an incredibly firm set of laws that protect the park, but sometimes it's very difficult to enforce those laws, and that's a different matter. And so there was a British oil company that decided that the laws wouldn't be enforced and they could get away with it. But what they underestimated was the resolve of the rangers to protect that park. And so the decision was made that under no circumstances could those laws be broken, could an oil company come into the park and explore for oil. But of course, a multinational oil company is no small matter. There's a lot of money involved. And so really to be able to confront that problem, we needed to bring it to the outside world. And that's really what that film was about. Of course, it's not a promotional piece for tourism. It doesn't really give you this incredible wish to come to this war-torn area from our perspective, if we didn't overcome the problem of oil, there wasn't going to be a park to show to people.
But in a sense, look, there's communities. The park rangers have families. Their families live around the park or near the park. Wouldn't exploration, thoughtfully or carefully done oil exploration, wouldn't that provide jobs and money and an economy for these people? Wouldn't local people want oil to be found?
No. I think it's a good way of thinking, just taking the oil inside the park. For me, it's a worst thing.
It's the worst thing?
Yeah.
Even though it could bring more money to the area?
No, I can say we have the other way to provide money, to have money from these conservation instead of going inside and dig just for nothing. The oil is just, I can say, a distraction. Yeah.
So you have an energy scheme program that's going on. It's not oil, but it's water, right?
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about what the two of you are scheming up there. It's quite incredible, actually.
Yeah, it's a fairly ambitious, fairly crazy project, but it was made possible because of the involvement of other people who really got inspired about what was going on in Virunga. And of course, this idea that this small team of rangers in the middle of Africa could actually confront these incredibly difficult issues. One of the most violent wars, or the most violent succession of wars since the Second World War, but also to be the first park that actually holds its ground in the face of big oil, and that could happen in the middle of Congo. It's a fantastic idea, but it also has to be realistic.
Right.
And for it to be realistic, you need a lot of help. That help came a few years ago from the involvement of one person in particular, who was Howard Buffett,
Sure.
Who believed in the fact that this park could be transformed, not just not just to be maintained as one of the most beautiful places on earth, but also to be the engine behind the local economy in a way that wasn't going to damage the park, in a way that wasn't going to maintain this terrible economic system, which is an economy of conflict, that's been inherited from the colonial period, where it's entirely based on extractive industries that are sucked out of the earth and thrown out of the country without any benefit to the local communities, and that we could start looking at a transformative industry around the park that creates businesses for local people, for local entrepreneurs, and really creates mass employment, quality jobs for a young generation of Congolese.
So what are you trying to do?
And so what we needed to do was really think about that, and can the park play a key role in that happening? And so what we saw was that really there were three pillars that we could draw on. One was, of course, tourism.
Yeah.
And tourism, you kind of think, like I was saying earlier, why on earth would anyone go to Virunga in the current circumstances? But you still need to look at countries like Kenya. Kenya in 2010 generated $3.5 billion from its national parks, from its tourism industry. the contribution to its economy. That's $100 million more than the total national budget of Congo. So this isn't a game. This is it's a strategic industry that'll determine the future of the country. So that was one thing, and Virunga really is the window that we can use to develop the tourism industry in Congo. The other is like you said, is water.
Yes.
And water is, and in particular in Congo, it's one of the most undervalued resources you could possibly imagine. Water is everything. Sam was talking about, if you don't preserve nature, you don't have the basis for life. And a key part of that is water. And so what we saw is we had this mountainous park, these very high altitude mountains with very high rainfall and these high energy rivers that flow through the park. And when they leave the park, they can be harnessed to produce electricity. And the thing about electricity, and these are small hydroelectric plants, that they're not dams.
Right.
They're called run-of-the-river hydroelectric schemes, so they're small. They don't flood the landscape, and the electricity is used locally, and that creates this explosion of enterprise.
But it's quite a lot of electricity. You're talking about 120 megawatts of electricity.
Yeah.
And that could power hundreds of thousands of people, right?
Exactly.
I mean,
exactly.
This is not a micro business. You're thinking scale here.
Yeah, that's what it's all about. And actually, if you look in all the studies by the World Bank and by the European Union and by USAID and so on, they all point to one thing as having the highest return on investment.
Right.
If what you're interested in is reducing the poverty levels of the poorest and most vulnerable in society. And so that's what makes it so interesting for us. What the park can do is create 120 megawatts of electricity. That's twice what the whole of Rwanda is producing at the moment. Just one national park can double the electricity production of a whole country. And so really that's the future. And it can do it in a way that will enable us to find solutions to the future of the park, but also to this terrible conflict.
Sure.
Because what we found is that can create an estimated 100,000 jobs. So if you consider that the armed groups, these militias that killed the guerrillas, that are the cause of this terrible war, there are between 5,000 and 8,000 of them in the region around the park. If you can create 100,000 jobs, you also provide an alternative for the young men who've erred off the path.
I would like to open this up to some questions. We've got about 13 minutes left, and there's a couple of mics floating around. So put your hand up, or I think we have I know we have a question. Go ahead. Yes, you're getting a question from.
We have a
Twitter.
From Twitter coming in. So Anu Pandi wrote, "What are the key challenges to your job, and how can I contribute to this great work that you're doing?"
Great. Who'd like to take that? What's the key challenge to your job? Don't say Rolex watch. What do you need?
As I say before, we need the international supports, means the communication between around the world, so that people can be sensitized on stopping these illegal trade.
Okay.
Yeah, I think something we both share is not getting shot would be a good start.
Yeah. Key challenge of the job. Don't get shot today. Yeah, we got that. And the next one is plastic boots. It's sort of
plastic boots. Is another one. Yeah. I actually lost my watch on the way here, so I was thinking, a raffle ticket would be good. No, I think Sam's right. We really need a sense of community, a sense of solidarity around the world. That a place like Virunga has to be protected no matter what. It's not just the fact that it's the greatest park on earth, and I'm not biased or anything, but it's also the fact that if we lose Virunga, it sets a precedent for every other World Heritage Site on Earth. And so it will be a domino effect.
Right.
It also
So how can people help? Like if they want to do something, what's a good way for folks to help?
I think one thing is just to become aware of what's happening. I think the film that came out last year is a good start. You know, it's available. It gives you a very real understanding of the challenges that this team of Congolese rangers have been confronted with, and that there are actually solutions. You know, it is possible to overcome these incredible challenges. So I'd say the first step is to try and get, you know, a worldwide awareness through channels like, you know, like National Geographic and the rest, but, you know, an understanding of what's happening in places like Virunga.
And I would say, look, if you want to support this effort, you know, you can support them directly. You can support them, obviously, through the National Geographic Society. And that support goes directly to the work that Innocent, Emmanuel, and George have been doing for a long time on the ground. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
I have had the great pleasure, my husband and I, of going to Virunga National Park twice. I was just saying, I have been through Rwanda into the park twice to trek the gorillas, and it is the most incredible experience, Mr. Schaller, as you learned long ago, to see these great creatures up close and see the intelligence and the compassion and the gentleness. And my question is this. You know, on the one hand, we're talking about Virunga, the documentary that came out and scares the tar out of anybody who wants to go there. And I've had this conversation with other people I know who have gone into the park through Uganda, which you can do also. And my concern is, how do we get people to go into Congo? And the question also is, do the economics, no matter where you come from, help your effort?
Yeah, you got 500 people coming. Does it pay the bills?
Yeah, so if we can get 500 people a month coming, that translates into over $1.5 million a year. So that's an enormous amount of money in Eastern Congo. 30% of that, and that's what the Congolese government committed to in 2009, 30% of that goes to the local communities. And so it gives us the basis really to create this, you know, the most important partnership of all, which is our partnership with the local communities. Because, you know, what they need is there is a desperate need for economic development around the park. These are the highest infant mortality rates on Earth. It's the lowest life expectancy. It's the second lowest life expectancy on Earth. You know, it comes down to money, unfortunately, and that's what tourism brings.
Innocent, can you keep tourists safe?
Yes. Now our area is I can't say it's secure. Now tourists can just come. I'll lead them to see what they want to see.
When a guy named Innocent tells you, you can come and say, we'll let him go. Yes, sir.
I also had that kind of experience, and you know, $750 is not a lot to pay for that kind of thing for a day. You might consider raising your prices.
Yeah, good point. Fair enough. For all of you, special price. And I'm just trying to get a couple more questions in, so just short questions would be wonderful. Yes, ma'am, or yep, someone, and go ahead. You can yell it out to me if you'd like, and I'll repeat it. It's coming.
I'm curious to know whether pride in the community surrounding the park is starting to spread. And for those where it's not a family business, could you tell a story about one of your newest rangers and why they joined the troops?
Yeah.
That's a great question.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so pride in the community, I think, you know, to be totally honest with you, it's a mixed bag. So there are, you know, this is a national park that is made up of 2 million acres of some of the most fertile land in Africa. And people living around the park are desperately short of agricultural land. So there's also a lot of resentment over the fact that they can't access the park. And there's a simple reality, which is that, so that we can all benefit, as a global community, as the whole of humanity, from the incredible richness, the biodiversity of this park, there's also a price to pay. And that price is being paid by the local people who don't have access to that land that's been set aside for conservation. And that's something we have to face up to. And so because of that, there are mixed feelings about the park. And that's, that's me being honest to you. But at the same time, I don't know if some of you may have read the New York Times yesterday. There was a big article on Virunga about the whole issue of oil. And in there, there's reference to some people from the fishing communities whose bodies were found floating in the river, in the lake, in Lake Edward. And these people were murdered because of their opposition to the destruction of the park, the possible destruction of the park for oil. And so that, at the same time, there are people who take enormous risks to protect this park, which is, one of possibly the greatest part of Congolese heritage.
And why do people join as a park ranger? Is it because it's decent pay? You've doubled, I think, the pay, right? Haven't you?
So it's not decent pay. I mean, unless you would, the pay for a ranger is about $180 a month. So it's a lot more than when we started, when it was they were receiving about $5 a month, if they were lucky. Innocent started in '96, and correct me if I'm wrong, but for about 3 or 4 years there was no pay at all.
Yes.
The salaries didn't arrive, and they kept going. So that's the great. Thank you. That's their situation.
Sure.
But in recent years, we've managed to build that out. We've started to harness a lot more support, and through this hydroelectric project, that's going to be the financial sustainability of the park as well. So that's a good thing. We've also started recruiting a young generation of rangers. And these are rangers who are between 20 and 24. Amongst them is the first team of women rangers. So there are 14 women rangers, the first in Congo. And there are a couple of those. There are a couple of those that really deserve a mention. One of them, she's called Zaverine. She's a wonderful person. She graduated after 8 months of what is essentially special force training. It's boot camp of the most brutal kind, because that's what you need to be a ranger. You need that training. And she came second out of a graduation of 108 rangers, 100 of which were men. And we, when you get recruited into the U.S. Armed Forces, for instance, as a woman, you get a certain certain adjustment on the physical training. They didn't get that. They followed exactly the same training as the men, and they competed with them, and they came out on top. So that's a really really encouraging and a really big development for the Rangers in Congo.
I have 20 seconds. I just have to ask you, do you think that the word battle and Virunga will be something that we won't hear, say, if we had this panel 10 years? Or do you think this... Are you optimistic? George, are you optimistic about...
Of course they'll succeed.
Thank you. Please thank our wonderful panelists. I wish we could have more time for this conversation. You guys were terrific, absolutely terrific. Emmanuel, Innocent, and of course, George.